I want to tell you, they did a funding bill. Senate passed the Ukraine funding in pre-dawn vote. This is true. This just happened.
They do more before 5:30 than you do all day.
So J.D. Vance sent this out. He said, I just sent the below memo to every one of my Republican colleagues in Congress. Buried in this bill's text is an impeachment time bomb for the next Trump presidency if he tries to stop funding the war in Ukraine. All I can say is thank God they're not going to let Trump stop a war. Why would you want that to happen? So this guy's, by the way, he sent this memo the day before the vote, and here's what it says. Here's the background on it. President Trump was wrongfully impeached by the partisan Pelosi-led House of Representatives on December 18, 2019. At the core of the impeachment was a pause on funds appropriated to Ukraine, $391 million in security assistance, $250 million through the Department of Defense, Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, and $141 million through the State Department's Foreign Military Aid Financing Program. So that's why they impeached him in the false argument put forward by Democrats was and is as follows. As president, Trump had allegedly paused these funds because he wished to see the corrupt nexus between the Biden family and Ukraine investigated. President Trump had abused his power with the aim of interfering with the United States presidential election. On page 425 of the committee report on the first impeachment states, quote, the president froze military assistance to Ukraine against UN national security interests and over the objections of career experts. The impeachment inquiry report states that the president did so despite the long-standing bipartisan support of Congress, uniform support across federal departments and agencies for the provision of Ukraine and military assistance, and his obligations under the Impoundment Control Act. So if you don't know why they impeached Donald Trump, they impeached Donald Trump because he paused funding of the Ukraine war machine. That's what this is about. That's why they did this. Okay. The supplemental that's why. He wasn't impeached because he wanted his rival investigated so he could interfere with the presidential election.
He wasn't? Is it because he crossed state lines?
Trump was impeached for putting a pause on money to Ukraine. How ironic. The main reason to vote for him is now an impeachable offense.
Yeah. The main good thing Trump did. Did he even pause it, or was he just saying he was going to?
He did pause it. So in the supplemental impeachment time bomb. So in this new bill, Trump has said he wants to settle the Ukraine war, and he said he'd do it in 24 hours. In this bill that they just passed, the bill includes $1.6 billion for foreign military financing in Ukraine, $13.7 billion for Ukraine security assistance initiatives, and those funds expire when? September 30th, 2025, nearly a year into the possible second term of President Trump. These are the exact same accounts President Trump was impeached for, pausing in December 2019. Every single House Republican voted against his impeachment for this resolution.
Wow.
So if you want to know how crazy your country is, mass murder and suppression of your constitutional rights is not an abuse of power, but a slight pause giving away your money to Ukraine is currently the only viable reason for impeachment of a president.
That's amazing.
This is real. So if President Trump were to withdraw from or pause this new funding that they just passed for the war in Ukraine in order to bring the conflict to a peaceful resolution over the objections of career experts, it would amount to the same fake violation of a budget law from the first impeachment under markedly similar facts and circumstances. Partisan Democrats would then seize on the opportunity to impeach him once again. The Washington Post has reported that tying President Trump's hands on foreign policy is very much top of mind for Joe Biden's administration officials who are openly boasting about their plans. So, not incidentally, the U.S. official said the hope is that the long-term promise, again assuming congressional buy-in, will also future-proof aid for Ukraine against the possibility that former President Donald Trump wins his re-election. So the conclusion is the supplemental represents an attempt by the foreign policy blob / deep state to stop President Trump from pursuing his own pursued policy goals on foreign policy. And if he does so anyway, to provide grounds to impeach him and undermine his administration. So here's what Aaron Mate had to say about it.
How crazy would it be for the House of Representatives to go along with this and President Biden to sign it into law?
For the fate of the planet, it would be suicidal, just prolonging this proxy war that is already lost and has already cost Ukraine, foremost, so many lives and so much of its future. But Joe Biden, who is responsible for this proxy war, who really began it 10 years ago when the administration he was serving in, the Obama administration, backed a coup in Ukraine, is desperate to prolong this war, at least until after November, when he's up for election. And amazingly, it was revealed recently in the Washington Post that, in the words of one U.S. official, the White House is trying to, quote, future-proof the Ukraine proxy war from a future president. So thinking here, if they can pass $61 billion in funding, that will lock in this proxy war funding for long after this year, no matter who becomes president next. So say the voters decide they don't want to go with President Biden anymore, and they want to change of course, they elect President Trump. Trump will be locked into allocating billions of dollars to fight a proxy war with Russia. And that's why in the same article in the Washington Post, they admit that only half of the $61 billion that are allocated here for Ukraine will go towards Ukraine's current battlefield needs. The other half goes to funding this proxy war long into the future. And that's a reflection that Joe Biden, who claims to be standing up for democracy in Ukraine, actually hates democracy at home. So much so that his pro-democracy bill for Ukraine actually defends against the possibility of democracy unseating him in the next election.
So let me bring in Aaron Mate. He's the host of Pushback for the Gray Zone, and in 2019, he received the prestigious Izzy Award for Outstanding Achievement in Independent Media. Most recently, in 2022, he won the Pierre Sprague Journalism Prize. His writing appears at his Substack, mate.substack.com. Hello, Aaron. Thank you for being with us. Can you believe that they're doing this, and they're doing it right out in the open? And of course, the media is not reporting it the way that we're reporting it here, correct?
It's good that you brought up the precedent of Trump's 2019 impeachment, because as you talked about, that also was an attack on democracy. The people elected a president. His name was Donald Trump. That's who was president. And when he paused those weapons to Ukraine, the national security state bureaucracy freaked out. And even people like Alexander Vindman, remember him, the star witness who was like one of the whistleblowers against Trump? He said that he was concerned that Donald Trump was undermining U.S. foreign policy. Well, the last time I checked, it's the president, not unelected bureaucrats like Vindman, who set foreign policy.
How long has it been since you checked, though?
And look, and even before the impeachment in 2019, how did this whole thing begin? It began when the people inside the Biden White House right now, Joe Biden, Victoria Nuland, Jake Sullivan, Antony Blinken, they backed a coup in Ukraine, overthrowing a democratically elected government, which set off this entire mess. And since they've come back into office after Trump, they've made it far worse by pushing Ukraine and Russia into this catastrophic war. And now they're trying to safeguard their proxy war against U.S. voters. So as the Washington Post said, they want to future-proof this proxy war in case U.S. voters vote out Biden in November, and the money that will be allocated now goes long into the future, which shows a few things. First of all, it shows that this idea that we care about Ukraine's current well-being and its defense is a joke. No, this is money to keep Ukraine fighting long into the future, rather than advocating the diplomacy that has always been available and that the U.S. has undermined at every turn. Last week, you covered this, Tucker Carlson interviewed Vladimir Putin. Putin said he's open to diplomacy. The diplomacy that Putin wants is going to be a worse deal for Ukraine than Ukraine could have gotten before Russia invaded and after Russia invaded. Just looking at after Russia invaded, there was that peace deal reached in Turkey in April 2022. We all know what happened. Boris Johnson came over, delivered a message to Zelensky on behalf of Biden that the U.S. and UK would not back Ukraine up if it reached a deal with Russia, and therefore that was in order to keep fighting. And so now, whatever Putin's going to offer Ukraine will be worse than what he was offering back in April 2022. But what's the alternative? Funneling more money into this disastrous proxy war, sacrificing more Ukrainian lives, and having Ukraine lose more territory. That's the path this has been on ever since February 2014, 10 years ago this month.
So, and when I tell people this, they look at me like, "But Putin's a thug, and he invaded Ukraine, and Donald Trump is a fascist." You know, I mean, Cornel West can't stop saying that,
He's a duty head too.
and uh, so do you, so to me, it kind of this kind of thing that they're doing, and they're doing it right out in the open. So even if you vote for Donald Trump because you like him, the idea that he's the only president in my lifetime that didn't start a war, and for some reason he has an aversion to starting wars, even if you vote for him, so this proves what Donald Trump said, that the deep state really does run things. This is the deep state. These are corporations having control of government. And there's even from everyone from AOC to Adam Schiff to Bill Maher is out there saying you got to vote for Joe Biden because of democracy. It's the exact opposite. These people are undermining democracy. These people are the fascists, meaning they are doing the bidding of corporations through the mechanisms of the government. So to screw who? Us. So the real fascists here are the people in Congress, the people like all those people. The AOCs, the Joe Bidens, the Republicans, Mitch McConnell's, they're the real fascists. Ironically, in this situation, Donald Trump is the opposite of that. He actually represents democracy in this situation. What would you say to that? Someone like me saying that?
Well, I would say that they certainly don't believe in democracy. I mean, the ultimate example is the fact that when Trump was elected, rather than let him govern and, fail on his own account or succeed on his own account, they framed him as a Russian agent. The National Security State collaborated with the Democratic Party. They framed the president as a Russian agent, which engulfed his entire first term. And those of us, the few of us who were against this, we were told to shut up and we were confined to the margins. And everybody went along with that. All the progressives in Congress, much of the progressive media, because people got so duped by this obvious scam that was, had many motivations, but one of them was to criminalize any diplomacy with Russia so that under Russiagate, basically, if you didn't believe in this idea that Russia installed Trump in the White House and that they weren't in cahoots, and all of a sudden you were somehow then supporting Trump and supporting Putin. And that same playbook has been used to push through the Ukraine proxy war to the point where every single progressive in Congress voted to give the military-industrial complex now more than $100 billion for this disastrous proxy war. Every progressive. One time for 24 hours, they advocated diplomacy. Remember about over a year ago now, they put out that letter calling for diplomacy with Russia to end the war.
And then they retracted that letter.
All it took was a little freak out from some neocons online and people like Max Boot and David Frum, and the Democrats withdrew their meek call for diplomacy with Russia. So we live in a complete McCarthyite environment. It's a scam because the people being ripped off are the people paying for it. We're all paying our taxes. It's tax season. How much of our money now is going to these neocon disasters, not just in Ukraine, but also for the genocide in Gaza as well? I mean, Trump plays a role in this in that he appointed people who all openly opposed his stated agenda. He claimed in 2016 when he ran that he was going to drain the swamp and that he was going to stop foreign interventions. He appointed people who had the exact opposite agenda. So whatever he intended when he was running, he didn't execute when he ran for office, and then ended up undermining him because a lot of these people took the same side as the national security state bureaucrats who were trying to frame him as a Russian agent.
How depressing do you find this?
I don't get depressed about stuff like this. I get depressed about, the genocide in Gaza. That's gutting. But
this is also a genocide. This is also funding. I mean, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have already been slaughtered in this war for nothing.
It's true. Yeah, it's true. I don't. You're right. I don't want to minimize that. It's very depressing. But look, I do think things are changing. There is now more faith in independent media, more than it's ever been before. And I don't tether the work I do to any outcome. I just try to do the best work that I can. And I'm grateful. Jimmy, I mean, listen, looking back at all these years, we've been calling this out from the start. And we've been warning about the consequences. And think about how many people agree with us and have come on board to our perspective. And I'm just now concerned with stopping the genocide in Gaza and speaking truth and letting the people do with that what they will.
I mean, you don't have to be a fan of Donald Trump to realize that we're being railroaded here, and it's a high speed railroad, which our funding for the Ukraine war could have actually funded in the United States 10 times over. Somehow we don't have the money for high speed railroad in America, but we have the money to send that money instead of having high speed railroad here to Ukraine. So Senators Tim Kaine, a Virginia Democrat, and Marco Rubio, a Florida Republican, they've teamed up, and they've also made it impossible for Trump to leave NATO. Right? Or they're trying to.
Yes, yeah. They passed a law that would basically prevent Trump from leaving NATO. Trump has criticized NATO. I don't think he actually would ever do that. Look, if you look at what Trump actually did in office, he did contribute to this Ukraine war. He tore up these really important nuclear arms treaties with Russia. He sent weapons to Ukraine that Obama wouldn't send. And I don't think it's because he wanted to do that. It's because he was facing Russiagate. He was being accused constantly of being a Russian agent, and he was incentivized to disprove his fanatic Democratic opponents who were obsessive about their conspiracy theory. And unfortunately, he didn't stand up for what he ran on, which is getting along with Russia, which is what he campaigned. He talked about on the campaign trail in 2016. He said, I don't want to have World War III over Ukraine. So he got it, but just once he got into office, he just didn't have the fortitude to stand up to the national security state. And luckily, I think all the advisors who he appointed who sabotaged his stated agenda of not getting involved in foreign wars, now they all hate his guts openly. Nikki Haley, John Bolton, Mike Pompeo. So if he wins again, they won't be back. But certainly the people that Joe Biden has brought in they're just an unbelievable threat to the planet. They had every opportunity to avoid Russia's invasion. Russia put out this draft treaty in late December 2021, a few months before Russia invaded. Biden he didn't have to accept all of Russia's proposals. He could have at least engaged with it, though. But they basically rejected the whole thing. And then, as we talked about, after Russia invaded, they sabotaged a peace treaty. I mean, and amazingly, and this is the most amazing part, try to find in U.S. media, even most progressive media, any mention of the multiple sources now who say there was a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia in April of 2022 reached in Turkey. The basic bargain was Ukraine would pledge neutrality, Russia would withdraw to its pre-invasion lines. And they were so close to signing it until Boris Johnson came over and told Zelensky not to. Is there any mention of this at all in U.S. media? When Vladimir Putin repeated it again in his interview last week with Tucker Carlson, did anybody report it? Has anybody reported the Ukrainian officials, including the head of Ukraine's delegation in Turkey, who said that, yes, we had a peace deal and all we had to do was pledge neutrality and we could have ended this war? Another Ukrainian official recently said, quote, Putin did everything possible to make peace. That's not a Russian propagandist saying that. That's a Ukrainian official saying that, a veteran diplomat. Did anybody report that in the U.S. media? No, because we live in an Orwellian state where the narrative has to be preserved that the reason why we're spending so much money on this proxy war is because the Russians won't negotiate. They're a threat to the planet. They're going to take over Poland next unless we stop them in Ukraine. So we have a complete media obedience with the Biden administration and their allies inside the CIA and the rest of the national security state. It makes it very difficult for normal people to have the information they need to make a decision.
So, So I spent a lot of my time trying to convince people, and we've done it on this show with our friend Ben, what's his name? Ben Glebe.
Oh, yeah.
Who said the Democrats are a little better.
Former presidential candidate Ben Glebe. And so he's just one example. I mean, I don't get nothing against Ben Glebe, but I'm just saying we do this every day of my life. I have another Ben Glebe in my life, and I have to convince them that the political parties are not opposite of each other and that they agree on all of the worst things. It's like your parents are getting divorced, but they both agree that you still should go to military school. There's no winners, and the Democratic Party abandoned any semblance of being anti-war and pro-worker about 30 years ago when Bill Clinton got elected president. That was the end. That's when Bill Clinton went on to gut welfare. At the same time, he exploded the prison population, put 100,000 more cops on the streets, deregulated Wall Street, and
wow, that almost sounds like a satanic inversion of everything he supposedly stands for.
that's exactly right. And then and he consolidated the media from 50 giant media companies down to 6. And then he was trying to privatize welfare, but luckily, according to Thomas Frank's book, it was that blowjob that stopped it. So Bill Clinton came in and did a Ronald Reagan wet dream, and then we've got nothing but Ronald Reagans ever since.
Yeah.
And even Barack Obama bragged. He said that his policies would be considered moderate conservative if it was in the 1980s. So he's bragging that they all praise Ronald. So that's why this country's like this. And before I let you go, all these billions of dollars to Ukraine for war and tying the future president's hand to make sure he has to do it, but they won't at the same time fund their own country. Like, again, we could have high-speed rail, we could have free college, and $10 billion would pay for community college for the whole country. They won't give people health care. They won't do anything they won't build affordable housing. We just did a story before you came on that they call them cost burdened. That's what they say about people who can't pay their rent because they have to pay 50% of their income in fucking rent.
Hey, if you don't,
they call them cost burdened, which is like calling homeless people sky roofed.
If you don't like poor illegal immigrants flooding the border, how about really rich ones that don't even bother to come here but own all the property and no one can live in it?
And so that's
even better.
So and we have 15 million empty houses in America because we allowed that kind of foreign investment to buy up all our.
And they're going to put the illegals in those houses.
So that's why it still blows my mind that when people like Cornel West came on my show and he pretended that fascism was a thing that might come to America. He's been living in it. He's been living in it for at least a decade or two. And he thinks it's still going to come if we vote for Donald Trump. It's just this kind of, I mean, you're from Canada, eh? So you probably have a better perspective, although Canada is just as shitty as America is now.
I would say it's worse with the euthanasia program.
We still have socialized healthcare, which is
you still have that. So that
so
does
the Nazis, and they got Nazis,
and now they're saluting Nazis,
and
we're funding genocides left and right.
They're sterilizing kids with mental illness, and next step is offering them euthanization. Is this reminded anybody of anything?
So what's the button you'd like to put on this segment, Aaron Mate from mate.substack.com?
Well, you interviewed Dennis Kucinich recently, and to me, he embodies the Democrats' lost opportunity, right? What's his message? Exactly what you just laid out. We're spending all this money on these disastrous foreign wars. We could be spending it at home. Is there anybody in the Democratic Party who can credibly lay claim to that argument now? No, because they all vote for it. I mean, honestly, I think the progressives who voted in lockstep with Mitch McConnell and Joe Biden to now authorize more than $100 billion for the Ukraine proxy war, they should that should be whatever else they do in politics. That should be their legacy. To me, it's the biggest betrayal I can think of in my lifetime of progressive politics than to give $100 billion to the military-industrial complex to fuel a disastrous proxy war that has ruined Ukraine and threatened the world. And these are all progressives doing that. So
doesn't that make them by definition not progressives? That's the thing.
Well, fair. Yes. yes.
So that
does.
So people keep saying, well, the left has lost their mind. They're not left. The people, they refer to the Democrats as left. And I'm tired of getting in that semantic argument and tell people that the Democrats aren't left. If you're for lockdowns and mandated medical treatments, and if you're for censorship, and if you're for war, you're not left. You have two completely right-wing parties. And then my friends who are right-wing go, well, we're not for war. And so now I'm stuck with this goddamn semantic game I boxed myself into.
Yeah, that's the joke. Remember when in the Tucker interview and Putin wanted to join NATO?
Yeah.
And they told him he can't. And Tucker said, why do you think that is? And he goes, well, because Russia's kind of tight-knit and it probably wouldn't go. You know how Germany's a bitch and goes along with whatever it's told?
Yes.
Like not having gas cheap. Okay. they didn't want Russia to join because it would be too strong a faction within NATO. They wanted to balkanize it and break it up into small, easy to control pieces. Like they did here.
Yes.
They did the thing they wanted to do, weakening Russia, and you're like, hey, it's weakening us. Yeah. The idea is to do that everywhere. That's the game, is to make you, or you're left, you're right Twix, but I like left Twix. That's stupid shit.
That's just what I've been fighting against. And do you share my opinion, Aaron, that there's because a lot of people respect you. People don't respect me, but a lot of people respect you. So do you think that I have this theory that and I'm shared by a lot of people, that there's a global cabal of billionaires that are really running everything. The WEF, it's right. It used to be hidden, like in the Bilderbergs, but now it's right out in the open at the WEF and the WHO. And they're bent on destroying societies. And like in America, if we have a civil war, that'd be good for them. And that's why I've heard that the Scottish commentator talking about that people who are meant to be kept on edge. And that's why they won't fix homelessness. That's why they won't give you health care. That's why they won't stop crime. That's why they won't give you education or infrastructure. And they want you to beg for authoritarian rules or authoritarian solutions to your anxiousness. Do you share that? Because that's what I really think is happening. And that's why the borders open. There's many reasons, but that's certainly one of them. One big reason the borders open is they need immigrants to join the military because nobody's joining. And they need to suppress wages because it's a tight labor market. But the third reason is to create chaos. And you see them giving $53 million in credit card money to migrants, which again, not to demonize migrants. If I was
Why should you have to qualify that? That's insane. It's insane on the face of it.
If I was a migrant, I'd want to come here because that's the game. They want us to be hating each other. They want you to hate someone lower on the economic rung than you, Kurt. That's the game. And I've always told people, if you find yourself being angry at someone on the economic rung lower than you, you're probably being manipulated by someone higher on the economic ladder than you.
Well, you know what I think? I think it's not billionaires at the top. I'll bet you there's such a thing as trillionaires.
Yeah, that's
and they're
another
slaves
thing.
Too. And they're just shit rolls downhill.
So of course there's
they
trillionaires.
Act like slaves themselves, right? It's like a pyramid scheme. The money flows up. They got to pay their upline, and you're in their downline. And then at the bottom of the base, we have, of course, the homeless. Then we're going to bring in illegal immigrants above the renters. You can see at every level of it. At the top, that's probably what all them UFO sightings are. Those are trillionaires, not time travelers. They're so rich, they get to live in another goddamn dimension. Like Bill Maher lives in another dimension than you do.
I know.
Everybody making more money gets to move to a higher. I bet you that's what it is.
So, Aaron, what's your comment on my theory about the billionaire class keeping everybody on edge?
I certainly think there's a deliberate effort to keep people in precarity. I mean, when you do that, first of all, when you have this permanent underclass of people who, for example, need to go to the military to be able to have a shot at a future, because it pays for their college, that's on purpose.
Yeah.
You keep people deprived of the basics that they need to live.
Well, it's called dog tags.
And they're forced to go, for example, those 3 young soldiers who recently were killed in Syria, were they over there in Syria and Jordan because they cared about stealing Syria's oil? No, these were 3 young black people who were in the military, I'm assuming because it was paying for their future. And this country puts people in that position where their best shot sometimes is to serve the country. And meanwhile, everyone lacks the basics like healthcare, or some people lack the basics like healthcare or shelter, that people are just trying to survive. So there's no time to organize. But of course, what bigger scam is there than taking more than $100 billion? Now they want to make it $161 billion with this new Senate bill and funneling it into a proxy war in Ukraine that just kills people. It's such a scam, but there's not the space to organize to oppose it because people are just trying to survive. So in that respect, I totally agree with you that it's deliberate. For what it's worth, when it comes to migrants, I support giving them money. I think it's the least we can do when we've done so much to destabilize their countries. And I would support even paying reparations to their home countries for the sanctions and the regime change efforts that we've launched there. So, and by the way, for all the Republicans and Democrats who are upset about people coming in the country, an easy solution is stop destabilizing their countries. Stop imposing sanctions that the U.S. knows destroys Venezuela's economy. and same with other places. So that would be one solution.
Well, how about we let them do it, and then we make you, the regular citizen, deal with it. You deal with all the fallout, and we keep invading their countries. How about that? Because that's what's going to happen.
That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm for helping people, but you don't see the. Do you think there's a bigger game being played that they're going to give very publicly in New York City alone? They're going to give credit cards, $53 million in credit cards a month to migrants who aren't citizens, while citizens and veterans and are living in cars and under bridges, and they won't give $53 million to those people. So can't you? So the fact that they won't do both at the same time tells you there's a game being played, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I would support funding everybody. But you're right. Yes, there's always this effort to pit people against each other. You talked about this a lot, and I definitely think that is a divide and rule strategy that we're living under. Absolutely.
So just like I saw in Boston, they're closing down community centers in black neighborhoods and filling it with migrants.
Whoa, I guess their lives don't matter after all, Boston, huh?
And so it's like you can do both things. You can have a community center for those people, and you can help those migrants. How about you take the $160 billion you're going to give to a war, and you do both? You help the communities center, and you help the migrants. This isn't an either-or situation, but they're purposely making it that, so we keep fighting each other, and then middle-class, hardworking, or working-class people are now angry at people lower on the economic ladder than them, because they're giving them all the things that they're supposed to be having. They're supposed to be having community centers, and they're supposed to be having schools. And so that's the game that seems so obvious to me that this is happening. And it's even starting to creep into local news even. Hey, come see us for telling jokes in Philadelphia, Boston, Los Angeles, Palm Springs, Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, Cortland, New York, Oakmont, Pennsylvania, and El Paso and San Antonio, Texas. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all those tickets.